Yes. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our eighth series in the recruitment webinar series, The Art of Recruitment. And today we have a very special guest, Job van der Voort, the CEO and founder of Remote.com. I'm your host, Adrian Kolf, co-founder and CEO of Matchr. And we are also a remote first company. But if there is one person on this entire planet that knows everything about remote first and is one of the most sought after speakers around building remote companies, it is actually Job. Job started remote.com in 2019, a remote first company that helps employers hire and pay, no, not hire, pay employees across the world. Right before the pandemic, Job started remote.com, grew from 20 to 400 people in 1 year, raised over $200 million. And currently, he just told me they are close to 1,000 employees. Unbelievable growth, unbelievable performance, unbelievable business model that Job has started with remote.com. I'm very honored and humbled to have Job here. I'll be honest, on Monday, Job was like, sorry, my agenda is too busy. I'm not sure if I can make it. I pleaded with Job and his team, please, can we have Job, because he's such a special guest, and it will be such an honor to have him. Job, I know you're in a hotel right now, and you found time to dial in with us, so I'm very grateful for that. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Adrian. Very happy to be here as well.
Yeah.
Shall I get started?
Yeah, so let's
Shall
get
I
started.
talk a little bit?
One thing, just guys, so in the chat, please ask as many questions as possible for Job. It's almost like quite rare that you have the opportunity to ask any kind of questions in such an open session. I've seen and known Job for quite some time now. He's always super open and transparent about everything that's happening. So this is your chance to ask any kind of questions, including how do you stay sane if you raise so much money in such a short period of time and grow your company so quickly. It's one of the questions that I definitely have for him. If the questions are very urgent, I will interrupt Job in the midst of his keynote, and otherwise we save them up for the end. All right, Job, the floor is yours. I will go and make my screen small, and we'll see your flashy, cool, and interactive presentation.
Thanks, Adrian. All right. So yeah, I apologize for the audio quality because I'm in a hotel room, which is something I don't really like to do, but it just happened to happen like this. So what I'm going to do over the next 20 or so minutes is to talk you through a little bit of my journey of starting remote. So we call the company Remote. The website is remote.com. But so if I talk about remote, being remote, I know that's very confusing. Sorry. Building that company, what led us to that, how we did it, and then in particular, I'll focus on how we think about maintaining or building a culture and making sure that people actually like to work in an organization like this, even though it's scaled up really quickly and it's really big. And I see already a really great question like high volume recruiting, and I will talk about that for sure. So just starting off from the very beginning, what is remote? So Adrian already gave a great example. Remote essentially acts as an employer of record, which means that if you want to hire someone in a different country, we facilitate everything related to that. So we hire the person locally in your stead, we take care of payroll, benefits, and everything else that comes with it. It's really, it's a really complex, annoying thing to do if you have to do it yourself. And so we specialize in that so that you can just hire people from anywhere in the world. We started this pre-COVID thinking that, yeah, over time, of course, businesses are going to do that, not expecting that every business in the world was going to do this starting from 2020. And that led, of course, to massive growth. And so today, and generally, I estimated it, we have about 800 employees working with us. I think in a couple of months from now, there will be about 1,000 that are actually employed directly working with us in about 70 different countries all over the world. And the reason I started this is because my previous company, it was not my company, but I joined GitLab in the founding team, in a very early team. And so GitLab was and is a fully distributed company. And what we found was that the benefits of a fully distributed company were massive. First off, it was so incredibly easy to find people, because if you hire people from anywhere, you have a much greater pool of people to talk to. And those people were very happy to start working remotely. The only thing we really struggled with was when we hire someone, how do we make sure we pay them? How do we make sure we stay compliant? And how do we scale all of that? And we never really found a good solution. So I led product at GitLab, but I still encountered this problem. And so after doing that for 5 years, I figured it's time to solve this. And together with Marcelo, my co-founder, we started Remote to solve that problem ourselves. And so I think this is a good start to talk to you about how we thought about building a company, right? Rather than, and I will not talk very much about how we built the product or the tech or the infrastructure, but rather how we built a company and to make sure that people there are happy and want to work there, etc. And truly, the first thing we thought, what are the foundations that we want to build this organization on? And we knew that a company like ours must have a handbook. And so we made one. It's publicly available, but it is actually in use, and we're continuously editing it. In our case, we use Notion for that, which you can see if you click on the link. And that handbook really set the foundation to this is, and we literally wrote it down, and you will be able to read, is we set the standards on how do we want to work together, how do we want to communicate with each other, and what kind of culture do we want to build. And the very first thing we did was we wrote down what our values are as an organization, starting with the most important value of kindness, essentially saying, well, we don't want to work with assholes. We have only so much time together on the earth. We at least want to make sure that time is a good time, and we enjoy spending that time with each other. And so that is exactly what we did. We wrote down our values, and we essentially said that if you are someone that wants to work with us or considering to work with us, a hard requirement to do that is that you align, or you're able to align yourself with those values. And that is how we will inform our decisions related to hiring. So deciding whether we're going to hire someone or not. This is how we're going to evaluate performance according to those values. And this is how we want to build the company for the long term. Writing that handbook was very important to us. And it was not an exercise of we sat down and we wrote down how we were going to do it, but rather it was an exercise of saying, well, we're going to start this, and everybody that joins the organization has to contribute exactly to this handbook. And that is what we did. And one of the important reasons why we do this as a remote organization, as GitLab did before, and as now you see more and more organizations before, is that no one ever did this before, right? So if you're starting a distributed company, if you're starting a remote organization, it's important to realize that there's never been an organization like yours, right? Not specifically, but even in the most general terms, there likely really hasn't been any, because we've not been working remotely for a very long time, let alone working remotely across many different countries, even within teams, right? That is really, really rare. And so you can really rely on the established scripts and ways that we do things. And we have been doing things for the past decades. Like, that's not the case. In an office, we know exactly what to expect, but that's not the case. And so we treated this exactly like this. And we started to, with this handbook, without any assumptions, without any defaults, we said, we're going to figure out what we believe is the best way that we can work as an organization. And of course, we had GitLab to inform ourselves, and we had an office-based culture that we knew about and that we knew worked and didn't work in particular ways to base this on. But we also always reminded ourselves that, well, no one really did this before. And so that's a good reason for us to assume that, well, maybe we can consider doing things differently or reinventing the wheel, so to say. And that led us, of course, to grow a team. And now, as I said in the beginning, today we have a team of 800 plus people. We are in 70 different countries, but that definitely didn't start out like that. In the first year of our life, from 2019 to 2020, Remote was a very small team. I think we ended with 9 people. So we started with 2, just me and co-founder, in January 2019. We quickly scaled to 4 people, and then we ended the year with about 9 different people. Those 9 people were all in the same country. We were all in Portugal at the time. We're not working from a single office. We never had one, but we were all working in the same time zone. And I wouldn't necessarily say that this was a necessity, but it was very convenient. And like, one of the ways that it was convenient is that if you have a small team, you can actually come together once in a while. And so that's what we did. We would come together once every 2 weeks, once every month, either to hang out, have dinner, have lunch together, and sometimes to work together. And there is a really good way, and I think it's very important to realize that spending time together in person, which is why I'm in a hotel room as well, is valuable. It's a worthwhile thing to do. It's a thing that is worthwhile, and the fact that you're building a remote or distributed organization, and you're saying, well, we don't have any offices, doesn't mean that you're denying the fact that that's valuable and a nice thing to do. As we started to scale, we realized that there's going to be a threshold where we're going to say, well, we're going to hire people all over the world. And for us, that change essentially happened almost overnight, where we went from a team where we said, well, we are all in the same country, to, well, we found someone great who's in a different country. And at that point, we hired independent of where people were. And so we were immediately faced with, the challenge of that comes with time zones. And in doing that, we had already written considerable documentation, and we had already spent significant time thinking about working in a different way. But truly, the best way we immediately realized to start working going forward is fully asynchronously. And that means, and you can read about it, and we've written a lot about it, and so did a lot of other people as well. But fundamentally, what it means is that we have to work in a way that we're not blocking each other, that work can continue at all times, independent of who's awake and who isn't. And this was a significantly important decision that we took to say, well, we work asynchronously, and that is the way we operate. That informed the rest of the history of the company. And now I'm going to take a sip of water because I'm talking a lot. And so in 2019, we worked on setting up the business. We started the infrastructure. We started building the product that we wanted to build, but we hadn't actually sold anything. And then in 2020, we were planning to continue to build the product, release it, and then grow it slowly. Of course, what happened is that COVID. And so with COVID, immediately demand for people that were starting to think about remote work and remote hiring, and therefore international hiring, massively increased. And so in 2020, we went from a situation where we had no product to, oh shit, we have to, as fast as possible, release a product into the market and be able to support that. And so COVID already was ongoing for 2 months. In May 2020, we eventually opened for customers in the first few countries in the world, and we scaled up the team to about 50 employees. In 2021, we only saw this accelerating and accelerating. And so we went in a single year from 50 to about 600 employees by the end of the year. And that was just incredible. Like, that's all I can say about it. And until today, I think we have, as I said, like we have 900 people now. We'll soon be over 1,000 just working inside of remote, working for remote. And so that's an incredibly large number of people. And so to immediately address one of the questions that was asked was, how do you handle this kind of high volume recruiting? And the high level answer to that, and I'll answer it over the next few slides as well, but the high level answer was that we built a strong brand for our organization. Right? The name certainly helps, but also we made sure that everything was in order. We had a great culture, and that we could sustain a great culture. And that is what I'm going to be talking about over the next 5 or so 10 minutes on how exactly we did that and how we scaled that team that fast. But like very operationally, recruiting this many people, it was all inbound, right? So we have more than 50,000 applicants a month internally. So people that want to work for us, not through one of the companies that we work with, directly for us. And the way to do that is to have a really strong software stack, one, and two, have a really great recruiting team, right? That can handle this load and has set really good standards for ourselves. And so we see that our metrics, for example, for time from first interaction to actually someone starting or having accepted an offer is quite short. It's around 20-something days. So to answer the question, how did we actually maintain culture in that scale, in going from 50 to 600 to almost 900 now? Well, the simple answer is we didn't. We didn't maintain culture. I think that is the sticky thing here. A company culture is what exists between all the different people. And when you grow, or when the organization doubles in size or triples in size or 10x's in size, the culture has to change with that. And in fact, it will change with that, independent of whether you want it or not. You can't have what you have in a small team when the team becomes much larger, right? This atmosphere, this culture of every single person knowing every other person and having a really great rapport with everyone, that's impossible to have. And that is one of the first realizations that we had, is that, in a typical office environment, you don't know people that are on the other side of the office. And even if you know those, you probably don't know the people that are in other floors unless they're particularly important to you. And so if you build a remote organization, that is the first thing you have to let go of. Not everybody has to know everybody. And that is definitely not something you want to optimize for. You want to optimize for an environment where everybody feels included, where everybody feels like they're happy at work, they can make connections with their coworkers, and especially with the direct coworkers, the people that they work with every single day. You want to make sure that those people build a rapport with each other, they bond in some way with each other. And so how do you do that? How do you do that at scale and massive speed? The first one is very obvious, which is in onboarding. When you think about onboarding, again, in a traditional office setting, you're walking to the office and it sort of happens naturally because you're there, you sit with people at lunch. All those standards, they disappear in a distributed environment. And so what we did is, one, we made sure to treat onboarding like a product. It has to continuously improve and it has to continuously get better because the organization changes. And so what people need to learn is different, but also the organization gets bigger. And so we'll need to change things because whatever works today is likely not going to happen or not going to work when we are twice the size, when we're 4 times the size. And other than that, a large part of what we do is onboarding is, one, making sure people are aligned with our values, understand what is happening in the company. A lot of that can be done self-serve, right? We have a handbook, you can read it up front, and so that gives you away a lot. But the other part is just making sure people have the tools and are introduced to people so that they can start to bond with their colleagues. And this is a really fundamental part of it. The beauty of it is that it's very simple to do. You just make sure you call with a lot of people in your peer group, people outside of that in different departments, with people in leadership, people not in leadership. And then you set someone up for success, right? Because you make clear what the values are, you make clear what the goals of the mission of the company is, and you connect them to the right people. That's a really good start. It's not super complicated, but it is important that you do it, and it's important that you systemize it. And that is exactly what we did. We made it very predictable, very straightforward. And then bonding. And this is, of course, what you hope to achieve with having a great company culture. How do you make sure that people actually bond with each other? And how do you make sure that people actually get to know each other? And again, the easiest way to do this is to get people to talk to each other. The problem with larger organizations and larger remote organizations is that you can create a calendar invite, for example, for bonding event. But for one, very few people will show up. One, in part because they might be sleeping. The other one being that the larger an organization is, the greater the threshold becomes to attend these kind of things. You have a lot of work. There's not a lot of social pressure on you. You won't be missed. It's what you feel in a large number of people. And so it becomes less likely that any given individual attends like a social event if it's Optin. And so what we do at Remote is a few different things. The first one is that we make sure that there's many of these events accessible independent of your time zone, right? We have at least 6 times a week at different time points, little bonding sessions. That's the first one. So this is a call you can join. There's an icebreaker question. We do one after every all hands. So another event where, it's the threshold is lower because you're already in a call and you moved into that. And then we make sure that there's many other ways for people to bond. And so that means ways to, for example, play games to each other. We make sure that we encourage people to join a large number of Slack channels about interests and hobbies that they may have. And above all, And honestly, this is the best trick. We make sure that most people only have these calls in their calendar and nothing else. So we actively discourage people from having any kind of scheduled meetings, right? Other than the most essential ones being one-on-ones with managers and anything specific to whatever they're doing for their work. But beyond that, most people have relatively free calendars. And that makes it so that any bonding kind of event, whatever it is, we have a group plays Dungeons and Dragons, there's a book club, there's a this and that. Those don't feel like yet another Zoom call, but rather they feel like, oh, this is a great moment to connect with my colleagues because all my other work has been asynchronously. And honestly, that's one of the best tricks. Now, we have another cool trick, which is that everybody at remote, we send a VR headset. And so, and we've been doing this for a long time. So everybody gets an Oculus Quest. And so you can get to hang out and play games in VR. And this is really great because it's not that great for working. So the threshold to work is really high. And so if you're going to do this with colleagues, you really have to play a game together. And that's, of course, a really good way to bond. What you really want is that people connect with each other out of the context of work. You can't expect people that are only working together and never have another conversation outside of that, or never leave the context of work to bond with each other. And this has been fundamental, I think. VR in itself has not been fundamental, but creating that environment has been fundamental to making sure our organization connects with each other. And this is the second to last point that I want to mention, and the second to last thing that we were very intentional about. And that's great benefits. And with benefits, I mean total rewards, everything. So we pay everybody really well at remote. Everybody earns a fair salary. And most people earn a really great salary. It's as simple as that. If you take away something like that, people are much more inclined to be happy in the first place. And because you take away a lot of worry, stress related to income and related to compensation, it is nice to work there. But also, we work really hard on making sure that the environment is a really friendly one to be. So we make a great point. We make it incredibly important that our organization is inclusive, right, and diverse. And creating such an environment it starts, of course, with hiring, and it's incredibly important. But it's fundamental to making sure people feel free and feel welcome. Nora asks, and I can address this right away. Do you play at local salaries? So that's a question everybody gets when they run companies like remote, that fully distributed organizations. The way we handle this at remote is that independent of the position, of the location of the person, the minimum we would ever pay someone is the equivalent to $40,000 a year. Beyond that, we pay highly competitive market salaries, but the markets are really rough cuts of the world. So we don't do country by country, but rather we do larger regions at a time. And so essentially what that means is that if you're an engineer, I think the average salary of the engineer is above $70,000 or $80,000. And that's basically independent of location, because location becomes less and less of a factor when it comes to market salaries. Over time, I expect that remote and many other organizations, not out of choice, but will be forced to have global salaries. We will never adapt, or at least on the short term, and I think many companies won't either, fully global salaries. And the reason for that is very simple. It's because then we would have to either pay everybody the top of the market, whether they are asking for it or not, right? We would have to pay everybody $300,000-400,000 a year, because that is what the total market gets paid in San Francisco and London. Or we would specifically say, well, if you live in those locations, we don't hire you. And for us, we decided, well, we want to be able to hire people in those markets. And so we will pay those people more than we might pay people elsewhere, because that is what the market dictates. And that's sort of how we solved it with remote. That said, we spend a lot of time on the compensation benchmarking, leveling people up when we feel they're too low, but also making very clear to candidates that come in incredibly high demand that, well, maybe we can't meet that because it would be excessive, and that would put it out of the range that we're willing to pay. It's a great question, and I know it's a really controversial subject, but I think this is a good way to solve it. Not an easy way, but a good one. And then I sort of mentioned this already, but a company culture, and a company in general, besides the product that you're actually building, the culture that you have is a product in of itself. And the product needs to evolve, it needs to change, it needs to grow up, it needs to become better, it needs to become, people need to work on that. And you have to treat it like that. You can't assume that what works today will work in the future as well. And you have to continuously think about, is this working for us, or do we need to make significant changes? This is really, really important. It's important because, maybe the people that you have in your company today might not be representative of the people that you will want to have in your company over time. And so your company will have to change for that. But also, your company might be bigger. Like I said in the beginning, a bigger company is a different company and needs and creates a different culture. And so we are constantly working on our culture. And actually, the very foundation of what we build are values. They have stayed the same since day one, but it doesn't mean they will stay the same forever. And I'm often thinking about, maybe we should replace this value, or maybe we should exchange it with another, or maybe add something else. It's a product, so we have to treat it like that. Keep iterating on it, try to make it better, and sometimes run experiments as well. So I think that's everything I had to tell. Of course, we did a million things in the last 3 years. I'm happy to answer any and all questions you might have. You can throw them in the chat, or Adrian can think of questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Super insightful, and already some great questions popped up. And I also wrote several down. But let's start with Sarah. Sarah asked, so with this hypergrowth, right, growing from 50 to 600 in your slides, like, how do you guarantee the consistency and quality of work and processes as you scale with such high pace?
Yeah, it's a great question. The fundamental way to do this is by having great managers, right? If you hire a lot of people, those people need managers, and a manager should not have too many reports. They should be able to understand what each person is doing, and help them and make sure that the work is doing well. So there's no magic answer to this. It's just like, how do you manage people? If you manage people well, you understand what is the output that they're delivering, what do you expect from them, and that is how you evaluate in part their performance. That said, when you grow really, really fast, sometimes you make mistakes in those things, and you'll have to be highly pragmatic. But as long as you set those high-level standards, this is what we expect. We hire someone with a clear job description, and each manager should understand this, and those managers, their performance is making sure the team performs, then you'll get there in the end. And with processes, it's the same thing. Those managers and those individual reports, they are responsible for that. There will always be challenges. Bigger organization is more complex, and it's harder to do. So all of this gets harder over time, but that the fundamental way to do it doesn't change.
Question from Nora on this. How do you align performance management with the culture of remote?
Well, the first thing is that, and we make this very clear, remote is not a family, right? Like, it's a company, and it's a for-profit company. We have a very clear goal. We have a particular mission and a particular thing we want to achieve in the world, but we think the best way to do that is in the way we run a business, which is a for-profit business. And in a business, what is expected of everybody is that they perform. And so performance is evaluated based on, like, how well do you align with the values, and how well do you do the job that is described, right? Like in your job description. That, and our first value being kindness, doing that and giving honest feedback to someone is being kind to someone. Because if you don't perform well, you can't stay in the company, obviously, right? Like, we're paying you to do your best job. And so what is very important in a culture like remote is that to give frequent, clear, and direct feedback to the people that you work with. And that is the best way to do it, so that it never comes as a surprise. Adrian, you did terrible this year, I'm gonna fire you. No, I should have told you the day one that I suspected or saw that something was not going well, that I should have said to you, hey, I think we can do better here. Or, can I help you to improve this? Which is a much friendlier thing than saying, I'm gonna fire you because you did terrible. But that's where it starts, right? And so that's how you solve this. You give frequent, clear feedback to someone, and you write it down. It's very important. You write things down, you create a log so that you can review it, that you can look at it next week, etc., etc., etc. And then you create something that is actually very fair and kind, and you can help someone grow. Or, and this happens as well, you can come to the mutual conclusion that maybe, Adrian, it's not a good match to work for me. And then, it's not nice for you to be in a situation where you can't do your job well, or like I feel unhappy, or you feel stressed because you're too challenged by it, or you're too bored by it, right? Both of which can be true. And then that's it. We're not a family. Like, you move on to something better for you. So that's how.
Yeah. Okay, very, very good answer. Also, like regarding the hyper growth, right? Again, 50 to 600s. How do you manage the org chart, and how were you able to keep people accountable with that rapid growth of both hiring, spending time on hiring, and still being able to build the product that they needed to get shipped?
Yeah, it's two different roles, right? And a manager, part of their time is managing their team. The other one is hiring. That's a really really important part of it, I think. And being really pragmatic. That's ultimately it. It's just being hyper pragmatic about having a clear mandate of what you want to build, and then following up with that. And then specifically on how do you build the org chart. Again, like we used a few simple tenets, which is essentially you should not have too many reports, and so you should hire managers in time.
Yeah.
And use the experience that we've had, because both my co-founder and I had previous companies where we saw this growth happening fast, not this fast, but pretty fast. And so we knew we had certain tenets to say, well, if you have more than 8 reports, you're going to have a manager. You're going to need a manager, right? And you're going to split up the team. If you can tell someone that reports to you that in time before you're 600 people, it kind of works itself out.
Yeah.
And then again, be hyper pragmatic. And it says in our handbook this as well, which is that when a company grows this fast, you have to expect that your job, the job of the people that you report to, the people that report to you, and everybody around you changes in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And so we have to do like restructuring, that not meaning like firing people, but literally changing the departments. And we did that a number of times last year, which is somewhat disruptive, but is necessary in a company of our scale. And we went in one specific case, we had this giant team. It started out as like 3 people operations, and now it is like 200 people, and it consists of 3 big departments with several teams within. That's something you just have to do, and you have to be pragmatic about it. When you feel like it's starting to get too big, then you just do it. You pull the band-aid off and you start restructuring it.
So I would like to zoom in a little bit. Bring us to kind of like the start of the pandemic, right? Like you guys, as you told, you didn't have a product out yet. Is that correct? You were
that's correct. Nothing. We were not making $0.
Yeah. You had the domain name. I think you already raised a little bit of money, right? In order to get the product shipped. So before the pandemic, what was your original launch date of your beta, your MVP in your original planning? And tell us a little bit more about like what happened pandemic, and all of a sudden you guys were in the spotlights.
Original launch date was like December 2019, which we just didn't make. It was not done. We didn't have the entity set up, so we couldn't. So it was basically as soon as possible. Yeah. And my line in my life is that I'm super pragmatic. I'll just do what I can. Yeah. And then a pandemic happened, and I started to feel it. I had 2 feelings. One was like, wow, this is a massive opportunity because we're going to see this big shift. I suspected it, but of course I had no evidence immediately. The other one was immediate worry, because to expand to new countries, I was flying to them. I was going to the countries, going to an office with a banker and someone at the municipality and signing shit. Couldn't do that. So I was really worried that it would stop. And so it was just from day one, basically remote. It's been a hustle and a scramble to get something together. And we were so close already in the beginning of 2020 to have something live. But we, you need to those last steps. We are at 98% to ship something. Those last 2% are so hard. And that's basically what it was. We had a lot of customers that we were talking to for a really long time. Companies that like needed this or were interested in these kind of services for a really long time. Basically, I looked at my calendar. It was the second week that we worked on remote. I was already talking to potential customers. And then at one point, it was a matter of like, for both the customers seemed much more eager than we were, because we were afraid, just like first customer, how everything is going to break for sure. And it did, of course. But they were like, yeah, let's do this. Let's try it out. And we did. And suddenly we had a business. So it was, in some ways, it was less of a boom when we launched, right? Because, we never said, oh, now we're live. And everybody came in, because it's a complicated product and it's expensive and whatnot. So it was a bit of a fizzle, but then it started to build up really quickly. And I think that's the real scary thing.
Yeah. So and Sarah asks, so what do you feel was the hardest phase, going from 20 to 50 or from 20 to 100? Like where do you feel what was the like, kind of like the hardest moment in terms of that growth journey?
Later, bigger is harder. Bigger
Mm,
companies are much harder. I think today is the hardest moment, and before today it was yesterday.
yeah.
It's once you get to a certain scale, you have just so many more problems, right? Like it's so much more complex, the organization, because when you're very small, you can make a lot of mistakes and you can revert them in a single day, and the impact is really little. But when you get really, really big, any change that you make, no matter how innocuous or how how random it might seem, the impact of it is potentially really, really big. And so, yeah, I think it's always later is always harder, but it's harder in different dimensions. I think, business building, which when you're small, it's difficult because you try to get started, but the managing the organization as such is harder later on. But there's many things that become easier because you have people for it, but overall, bigger is hard.
Yeah. Hey, I've a question for you, and maybe it's more like almost like a personal question in that sense. How do you feel that what happened to you in that sense, with so much attention, so much money, full in the spotlight, like being all of a sudden on this rocket ship, going from a 20 people to in 2 years to almost like 1,000 people company? Like, what have you learned for yourself, and where did you have to like reinvent yourself?
Uh, that's a good question. I get the question a lot about like how does it feel, but I don't really know. I still go and work in my office every single day, and you know my kids still wake me up in the middle of the night, and I still have to go there. So I don't. It doesn't feel desperate. I think the size is really hard to imagine, right?
Yeah.
So you don't really think about it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think the thing that I had to learn was to be patient because I'm very hands-on and I tend to be very hands-on. But if you do really big, complex, hard things, they take a long time to get done, and it takes a long time to turn a large ship. No matter how great the ship and how many motors it has, it takes a long time to turn one. So being patient and not trying to get stressed or upset with every little thing that goes wrong, because yeah, if you have a really big company, a lot goes well, a lot goes wrong as well, in all sorts of ways, right? Like in the best ways and in the worst ways, and
Yeah.
that can be really hard to deal with. And I can't deal with all of that myself, and so I have to have patience and some resilience. I think that was the thing I had to learn.
If you would go back to that moment, like right when the pandemic hit, what would you tell yourself now with the knowledge that you have now? Like, would you have done anything different, or like are there any things like with the knowledge of now, like is there anything that you would tell yourself?
Now, very specific things like hire that person, don't hire that other person,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and like particular things that we should have built differently or should have done in the way that we did, maybe. But no big things. I think generally I believe we made the right choices. Um, I think I never worked too much, but maybe I could have worked a little bit less. That would be it. Other than that, I don't think. Yeah, there's no major things I would have done differently.
Great answer. Want to switch gears a little bit? More questions around salary, right? So two questions there. How do you calculate kind of like the estimation if you don't look specifically for country but more for region and profession? So where like what kind of benchmarks do you use? Like how do you kind of like keep that fair? Do you do Asia, Europe, or do you do specific regions in Asia, for example? Or yeah, how do you do that?
Yeah, we cut off the world in like 5 regions, something like that. I think we're building a tool, so it will be in our platform itself. So you will have exactly this kind of data inside. But yeah, we have a bunch of data for this. We set our own minimum and we set target percentile that we want to be in the market.
Yeah.
That's the best way, is to pull some compensation data from somewhere or a comparable company, or because you are aware of the market and go by that. My general suggestion would be is that if you're able to pay a little bit more than what you thought you were going to pay, as in like, especially if you think about local rates, especially if you think about local rates outside of like the big countries with a lot of tech talent. And the reason for that is that there's so much demand still for talent, and it still exceeds the amount, um, almost anything that's out there, that more and more people will be seeing this. And if someone is paid a local rate that is, poor, they're likely going to leave for a different opportunity that pays better. And we're going to see more of a leveling in the global market. So relying too much on like local data for salary is going to hurt you in the long term, because people are going to leave because, well, now this random startup that just got funded like ours with like $200 million, they're just going to double this person's salary, and it's still going to be less for them than to hire someone from London or San Francisco. So, pay people well is what I would say. And if you don't necessarily want to hire people from San Francisco and other super high salary regions, then consider setting a global salary where you say, well, everybody earns just under the median London software engineering salary, and then you don't pay that much, but you pay much more than any local players, and you do pretty well. This is really difficult problem to solve. I realize that like a simple answer like this is not sufficient, which is why we're building a tool, but it's also why people ask questions.
Yeah, interesting. So what happens when someone decides to move from, let's say, Asia, for example, to Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that you guys encourage or like offer? Like, would someone then immediately make that jump, or how does that work? What's your policy there?
Yeah, our internal policy is essentially that you have to tell us, because if you're working in one country, it doesn't mean you're allowed to work in another country. We have to remain compliant, and we do this for our customers as well, of course.
Yeah.
So that's the first question. And the second one is that given that you're making this change, if you are you have to assume, and the way it actually works is that you have to get a new contract, right? You go from being employed in one region to another region, and the calculus for a business changes, right? Because we hired you for value X and expecting output Y, and now that X might be much higher, right? And we still get the same output from you, or do we? And so we sort of say, well, let us know in advance. So either if you know in advance, we can assume that you're going there, and then we adjust salary, or we pay you the local salary right away. But in general, like, there's a chance that we say, well, what you then ask from us is something that we can provide for your position that you have, and you will have to find a different job. In reality, that doesn't really happen, mostly because we pay people enough so that they might not even warrant a salary increase. But that's sort of how that outlines our policy on a very high level. At GitLab, we had basically the same policy, which was much more dry, and that basically said, well, we have the option to offer you a new contract, and it's up to you to choose. But in reality, very few people choose to move to a much more expensive location. So we solve
it balances each other out, right? Yeah, and leaving your home country or wherever country you are is often not for everyone. Job, in the beginning, you said something very interesting for bonding, and you said you have opt-in moments for people to socialize.
Yeah.
I'm curious about several things there. So one, who owns those moments to kind of like set them up, promote them almost to extent, and have people join them? And two, how do you keep people from coming there? As you said, that it doesn't distract from work, or that you don't have like that 5% that people like that are eager, and the rest kind of like, I've got other things to do.
Yeah, so, well, setting them up, we just have fixed times, right? And the people team manages that, the people operations team, and they just in everybody's calendar by default. So you can join them if you want.
Yeah.
The expectation is that it's only the 5%, or when you get bigger, 1% or so joins it. It's not, the point is not like high attendance at all. The point is that people have something to do, something to go to. And you have to realize that, and I really believe very strongly in this, is that a remote environment can accommodate people from, with very different personalities, more so than an office. And so that means that we also give space for people to connect in different ways. So like Slack has this new huddle feature, which is really nice, which is essentially an audio room, right, where you can hang out. And we use these as well. And so some people prefer to use those, and they are half of the day in those. We use those very regularly. And they have it on while working sometimes and chatting with you. Sometimes they set up moments. There are other groups that have very formal get-togethers, like a Dungeons and Dragons group is getting very serious nowadays. It's a really long-spanning campaign and everything. There's people playing all sorts of games together. The point is that there's many different ways many options available to people to connect with each other. And if some people feel like, well, I get everything I need from the team in which I am, and sometimes we chat after having a meeting, for example, that's fine too. I think it's important to give many ways for people to connect with each other rather than saying you must be in this one thing, because that is gonna, it might work to a degree, but it's not actually what you want to do. You want to just make it comfortable for everybody. I am someone that I like to socialize it, but I don't need it that much for like my battery. And so I don't attend that many of these things. I attend it when I feel like, oh, I have some free time, or now I do feel it, and now I feel like I need it. I don't attend that much. And like that's sort of how I expect most people to do. I also know that there's people that attend every single one all the time. That's great. And I'm happy for them.
So, and then in terms of kind of like the whole remote rapid growth, you say, hey, these teams are not mandatory. So how do you kind of like how are you able to share learnings in specific teams that are working on a specific product versus that they get the information to the other teams? How have you set that up? Also, one of the questions in the chat, like what tools do you use for collaboration? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, different things, right? Like first off, like information sharing and like what is happening in each department or in each team, that has to iterate, and it depends on the size of the organization. When you're small, everybody just dumps everything on the general channel Slack. But that stopped working, and actually we just moved over to a new system literally yesterday, which is we have a new channel called Announcements. And what people do is they can create announcements. Nothing else can be posted in that channel. You have to use a bot for it, so it keeps it sort of clean. And people make team updates, and those team updates, they are typically a Notion page. We use Notion very heavily. That has all the information with links going to whatever it is about. So some team ships something, they send links to where you can find it, where's the documentation, where are the GitLab issues. GitLab is another tool we use. And then another super heavily used tool we use, they tend to record a video with that, a Loom. And so where they talk through that update. But it's always about the same thing. It's always about that Notion page, right? So what we now have is, with all of this, is that there's a Slack channel where you can see the new updates incoming.
Yeah.
There's a page or database in Notion that has all the updates. So at any time you can look there, you can go through them, calmly read them. And for each one, you have also a Loom video, so you can listen or watch. And so you have all the modalities, and it's available both, synchronously or like ephemerally through Slack, as well as like at any time, forever, until the end of time in Notion, available there. And so that's like how we share updates with the team. Other things like how do you communicate and such, we set standards and we iterate on those standards, right? We don't use email. We use, for direct communication, we use Slack. For context-dependent information, we use the tool that we use. So our tool stack is pretty straightforward. I can probably call all the tools right now. So we use Asana, Zendesk, GitLab, Slack, Notion, our own tool that we built, Loom. That's about it. That's our Salesforce. That's about all the tools we use. And so they all integrate with each other, and they're all very mature tools, right? So that keeps it really lean. Don't use too many tools. Is another tip.
Wow. Fascinating. Amazing. 8 minutes left. Joop, what does the future look like for remote? At the beginning, when we had our introduction, you said, growth is still happening, still very rapidly scaling. Tell us a little bit more about your vision of where remote is going to go. Like, what does the final dream look like to that extent? And also, what do you see, now that COVID, my words, is at least slowing down a little bit. At least countries are keeping their borders open a little bit more, despite new variants coming up. What do you see happening in the remote work field as well?
Yeah, I'll answer that one first, and then I'll get to the company because it will lean into each other. The thing that happened is that there's this massive shift from employers own the narrative, but they also have all the power, which is to say, if I'm a great employer, I decide where you live. I decide where you work. If you live in Amsterdam and you want a job and you don't want to move, you have to find an employer in Amsterdam. And there's not that many employers in Amsterdam, especially not for your specific profession. And so, you'll have to make do. And if I don't pay you that well, or if I say you have to come into the office, yeah, you don't really have a choice because every employer in our store is going to say that. And that has changed now, right? We are all aware of this. And so this drives the great resignation. And so now the power is in hands of the individuals because they know even if half of the employers now go back to saying you have to go back to the office, you know that there's the other half that will say, oh, you can work wherever you want and I'll pay you just as well, maybe even better than those local players. And so that gives a lot of people the freedom to say, well, I'm going to work for those. Because even if I like working from an office, and this is the thing that I keep hearing more and more, a remote organization, one that allows distributed work, they also offer significantly more freedom in how you work, when you work, in how work is structured. And even though you might prefer to work from an office, and some days I feel like I'm a person, like I like having people around me,
Yeah.
But I don't want to have 9 to 5. I don't want to commute somewhere either. And I want to have the flexibility to decide, I want to move to a different country. And so that drives the future of work, independent of where we do the work or how the work will look, whether we use VR or not, which we totally will over time. But independent of that, that is the most defining features, that the power is now in the hands of the individuals, especially the ones that are in high demand. And like generally, knowledge workers are in high demand and they're hard to find and they're well paid. And so that drives our future as a company as well. We just want to make it easy for organizations to be this competitive, right? To be this company that says, well, with us, you can work from anywhere and we're going to make it easy to work for us. And so we want to be the enabler of that. And so being an employer of record is just like one step in the direction. There's so much more things that we want to do to just make it easier. Because ultimately our mission is exactly that. Is that independent of where you are, where you're born, what you look like, where you live, where you want to be, you can make an amazing living for yourself and take care of yourself and your loved ones. You can make more money by having access to greater opportunities and having those opportunities easily available. And so whatever we're doing in the future is to enable exactly realizing the vision.
Amazing. I love that vision. Thank you so much, Joop. One last question popped up from Zahir. What are the training and development programs you have for remote resources?
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend Zahir to check out our blog. There's remote.com/blog. There's a lot there. We build, of course, internal things. We also host a lot of webinars and such, and we try to publish as much as we can. Yeah, and check out our handbook. I generally recommend you because that's what we use ourselves. Like it's the one on communication is really short, but it's really clear. Like how do you communicate? My co-founder Marcel wrote a blog post about asynchronous working. It's kind of dense, in a good way. Like follow that to the T, and like how to work asynchronously. So I think that's a good start.
Amazing. Joop, is there any way that people can connect with you or follow you? What are the best channels to do so?
Yeah, if you want to talk with me, the best way is also to reach out on Twitter. I actually respond there. You can also just reach out on LinkedIn, Twitter. Yeah, just type my name. You'll find me. It's Joop. JOBVO is my JOBVO is my Twitter username.
Perfect. Hey, and then the last question. I asked this as well at the beginning of the chat. Someone asked an off-topic question. What is this awesome presentation tool that you're using?
Yeah, it's called it's this. So I recommend everybody try it out. And I was showing earlier to Adrian, you can do all these cool effects, like I can make it rain. I can make it appear like I'm in a Game Boy or in Star Wars. Or
so good.
It's very cool. So yeah, check it out. It's not free, but it's totally worth the money.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, you already got 2 compliments on it, and people are impressed. Joop, honestly, thank you so much for taking the time, for clearing your agenda and being here with us today. So many useful insights, such an amazing story. I'm definitely a big fan of what you're building, but also like how you're running it and how humble you are. And thank you so much for sharing all this information. Being a remote first company, only 30 people in, but growing to 60. We've learned a lot from how you communicate, how you set up your teams, and also just the mindset of sharing and being transparent about what you're doing. So you're big inspiration for us. Thank you so much for being here. Next week, guys, I won't be here. I'm taking a short time off. But we have a very interesting speaker. We have Tom Case. He's the former head of recruitment of Intel venture funds in Silicon Valley. Oh, that was Joop had to go. Former head of Intel venture funds and is currently working for Cerebra Systems, a computer systems company. and they're building a new type of computer optimized for AI work. And they contain the world's largest chip. Very technical and very rapid growth. But what's very interesting about Tom Case's profile, he has seen so many companies throughout his work at Intel. And he's going to be talking about startup recruiting and then his experience in it. Amazing speaker, very exciting to have him. Also exciting to have someone from the Silicon Valley area and share his experience. So definitely join us next week. We'll set this recording live soon. And guys, thank you so much for attending and all your questions and interaction. Bye-bye.